Good evening and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Sidana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have Sandeep, who's a GMAT strategy expert, and he's going to be your co-host today. He's going to make sure that your questions in this webinar get answered. The goal of this webinar is to help you move along the journey of pre-thinking. Pre-thinking, a very important skill when it comes to answering assumption questions, especially for those of you who are aiming for that 90th percentile in GMAT critical reasoning, or who are aiming for that V36 or higher score on GMAT verbal. Essentially, what it translates into is if you want to score higher than 700, you need to ace pre-thinking. Now, pre-thinking is a skill, which means that it takes some time to develop, which also means that that pretty much everyone can develop it. And to make sure that you have the right foundation to be able to imbibe pre-thinking, take that to that next level, we did send a few video lessons your way. The video lessons are on Introduction to Assumption, Pre-thinking Logical Gap, and Pre-thinking Two Entities. If you've not gone through these video lessons are a part of your free trial. Do go through them. And you're going to find that uh, assumptions questions come a lot more naturally to you once you have that right foundation, once you actually start applying pre-thinking with the frameworks that are taught in these video lessons. So again, they are a part of your free trial. Just log into your e-GMAT account and go through them. Now, we also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free webinar on algebra tomorrow. It'll be hosted by Pyle, and really engaging webinar. In this webinar, Pyle talks about how you can, if you just know the basic skills on inequalities and absolute value, how you can use those skills to answer the most complex questions that the test will throw at you. We have a GMAT strategy webinar. And let me actually just ask this question. How many of you are planning to take the test? Actually, we already have this question over here, but just want to be a bit more specific. How many of you are planning to take the test in the next 30 days? Select yes if you're planning to take that test in the next 30 days. All right, about 20 odd of you. So if you're planning to do the test in the next 30 days, you need to have that solid study plan. You need to make sure that you have those metrics defined that tell you that you're actually moving towards our target score. And this webinar over here tells you that. Now, even if you're not taking that test in the next 30 days, if you have, let's say, 2 months, 3 months before the test, you still need those metrics. You still want to make sure that you are focusing, putting your energy in the right areas to maximize your score improvement. So that's that webinar. You can click on that and attend that. So let's understand the makeup of this group. So the question that was there was, when do you plan to take the test? And based on the responses, I have about 150 responses here. What I see is that we have a fairly evenly sized group. The only smaller subgroup here is those who have between a month and 45 days, which is when I guess R2 deadlines actually start to creep in. And let's kind of get also to this other data point, which is what's your target GMAT score. Okay, the question was, what is your target GMAT score? And what you see over here is very few people in the 600 to 650 bucket, about 20% of you in the 660 to 700. And then you see a bulge in the 700, 710, 720, 730, 750, biggest group. And then about 16% of you are in that 760 or higher bucket as well. Okay, with that, let's move on to the webinar pane. I want to make sure that you guys can see the presentation. Select yes when you see CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions. If you can see that, start selecting one, or rather select one. All right. Okay, pretty much everyone can see that. That's great. Let me actually bring the webcam on. So just Just a quick poll. Is it much better with the webcam on? Let me again put in this poll over here. I want to make sure that uh, let me just say. So the question is enter your preference. Is it webcam on or off? Select one of these two. Okay. It's I can really see that on is the clear winner. Let's make sure. Interesting. Question is enter your preference. Do you want the webcam to be on or off? And 78% of you have said you need it to be on, and thank you for that choice. So we'll keep it on, and then as we go towards solving questions, we'll turn it off. So there are essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to e-GMAT. In the second part, I'm going to go right into the core of this webinar, where we're going to talk about pre-thinking. And then in the third part of the webinar, if you have questions that are not pertaining to GMAT critical reasoning, that are pertaining to other aspects of just your MBA application or preparation for the GMAT, then I usually reserve about 20 minutes towards the end for an open-ended Q&A. I would be happy to take any such questions at that time. So with that, I asked this question. I said, like, what's your target GMAT score? And upwards of 70% of you were aiming for a score of 720 or higher. And while that may be the case, only 6% of the people statistically get there. And this is despite the fact that when you look at median scores at top B schools, they have been going up for the last, 6 years now. And these are some recent data points. In fact, if you're aiming for a USB school, today you need a score of 720 or higher. In fact, 730 is the preferable score overall. And if you need more evidence, if you go to our YouTube channel, I have about 100 success story interviews there. Many of those are people who had scores of 690, 700, couldn't get into any business school, improved their scores to 750, not only got into the same B schools, but also got scholarships from the same business schools. And these guys got specific feedback from schools that they need a higher GMAT score. So what is it that people who get to these scores do? A good percentage of them do use e-GMAT. If you look at stats on major forums, you're going to come to a very similar conclusion. What kind of stats? If you look at the number of verified reviews, or if you look at the number of success stories that have been posted over the last 12 months, you're going to find that most students use e-GMAT course. Most students who get to those higher scores use e-GMAT course. In fact, 65% of all success stories posted on GMAT Club Share GMAT Experience Forum in October mentioned using the e-GMAT course. So what makes our students more successful? I think there's one thing that makes our students more successful is our approach to GMAT preparation. And what aspect of that approach makes our students more successful? Let's kind of look at that. One key thing in which we are different from any other prep course or prep company out there is the architecture of learning that we provide. When you think about the learning architectures that exist today, there are two dominant architectures that exist in the world today. One is what we call as a book-based learning architecture, and the next is the private tutoring-based architecture. When you map most of the courses out there, what you're going to find is that most of the courses, even though they may provide audio-visual lessons, they may provide learning exercises, they're built around that book-based approach. When you map e-GMAT to one of these two architectures, you're going to find that e-GMAT is much more closely aligned with that private tutoring-based architecture. So let's see why is it that we say one architecture has a much higher success rate than the other. So to do that, let's see how do you get to that score of 720 or higher or 750. The first thing you need to do to get to that score is to create a path towards that goal. And when it comes to creating that path towards that goal, what it really means is you need to know where you're going to spend your time preparing. You need to know how much time are you going to spend and how are you going to track that improvement. So just at a very high level, even before you start learning any concept, you need to be able to do that. Then you need to learn all the concepts that you need to know. Merely learning those concepts isn't enough. You need to know how to be able to apply those concepts. And you need to get so good at applying those concepts that you get into that top 5, top 6, or even top 1 percentile of students. So let's see how a book-based approach tackles that problem. A book-based approach is all about autonomy, which means when you start studying using books, you get a couple of study plans. Usually, prep companies, courses offer book-based, a verbal-focused, a quant-focused study plan, a 1 month study. So you get probably 3, 4 study plans, and you choose one and work on it. So essentially, those study plans are coarsely focused on your strengths, not personalized to the student uh, as such, but personalized to a group of students. Um, you take one of those study plans, you start learning concepts. Now, books do teach you concepts well. The only problem really is they don't validate whether you've learned the concepts properly. And so when you go through, when 1,000 people go through a certain chapter in a book, they learn to 1,000 different degrees. And that burden of validation as to whether that student has learned properly is completely on the student. One area where books rarely fall short, and a lot of online courses fall short, is teaching you how to apply those concepts. Um, when you work with a private tutor would tell you what you need to do in step 1, step 2, step 3. Books don't really tell you. Books don't tell you as you falter while applying a particular question, where did you falter? And so people who actually follow this approach, they focus on solving hundreds and hundreds of questions. And a few are able to master it, but they're far and fewer, and those are the exceptions. Most people don't. And when it comes to that evaluation of mastery, people who follow this approach resort to taking a mock test every 10 days. And again, when you're studying sentence correction, taking a mock test doesn't do justice because you're being evaluated on everything. Your poor performance on one other subsection does impact your confidence even in sentence correction or critical reasoning, whatever you've been focusing on. And then even when you take a mock test, it becomes difficult to evaluate your performance on that mock test. A private tutoring architecture works very differently. When you work with a good private tutor, the first thing that a good private tutor does is he or she creates your study plan. And that study plan is created, which is personalized to your strengths and weaknesses, and it ensures that you attain, for the time that you have, you get the maximum score improvement. I asked this question earlier: how many of you are going to take the test in about a month? If you have a month, you need to make sure that you put your energy in the right areas. Then you learn concepts, and as you learn concepts, the private tutor gives you feedback on the areas that you need to work on. Um, After you've learned concepts, a private tutor teaches you how to apply those concepts, and then tells you, hey, as you're solving a question, what do you need to do in step 1, step 2, and step 3. And while you're solving questions, a private tutor evaluates you, and when you get to a level, when you attain that level of mastery, a private tutor automatically moves you from one particular topic to the other. So while you learn the same content in both these architectures, the extent of personalization, the extent of focus, the extent of feedback, there's a lot more in a private tutor-based approach. And you can really see why on a test such as the GMAT, where the top 5 percentile get about 80% of the scholarships that these schools have to offer, why a private tutor approach would be a lot more successful. So let's see, why do we say that most of the courses out there are based on this book-based architecture, whereas e-GMAT's built on this private tutoring-based architecture. And we're going to really follow the same set of steps where we say, how do we help you create your own personalized study plan and move on from there on. So we're going to take the example of a student who wants to go from a 600 to a 720 score. And again, the first step is to figure out where you're going to focus your time or create that personalized study plan. To do that, you need to figure out where you currently are. That score of 600, what quant, what verbal scores you have. Within those quant scores, what arithmetic, what algebra scores you have. And then the verbal scores, what SCCR and RC percentiles do you have. And to do that, we ask our students to take a Sigma X mock. As they do that, they get the milestones, their starting points, which they can feed into our AI-driven tool called GMAT Planner. So what does this tool do? It takes in your quant and verbal scores. It also takes in your starting abilities in quant and verbal. And based on that, it tells you a set of target quant, target verbal scores, and the target set of abilities. And let me actually see if we can draw over here. So these abilities over here are the target abilities that you need to do to get to a Q50. Then on the verbal side, it does the same thing. It says, hey, if you want to get to that 720 score, you need a Q50 V38. And to do that, you need to attain these abilities on the verbal side of things. So when that happens, you have your starting scores from the Sigma X mock, which is, by the way, the world's only mock test that gives you those scores. Then you have your target abilities over here. And you have the same thing on verbal side. So your entire GMAT preparation becomes like 5 mini GMAT preparations, where if you track those metrics, track those starting to target abilities, you can be very certain that you can hit this target GMAT score over here. Once it does that, it creates that study plan where it tells you, hey, what are your starting scores? What are your target abilities? And how much time does it estimate, based on the data that we have of upwards of 40,000 students, do you need to spend to attain mastery? Now, it does this based on the amount of time you tell this particular tool that you're going to spend every day. Okay. And then when that happens, you really see your GMAT preparation as these mini preparations over here. And then these are, think of them as mini sprints of 1.5 to 2 weeks that you do, and where your goal is to hit these milestones over here. It also gives you a day-by-day calendar view where you can look at how many hours you're going to spend, and it will tell you what is it that you're going to spend those hours on. For example, over here, you're going to spend this about 7 days on, about 9 days on algebra, on arithmetic. Then you're going to spend about 11 days on algebra, and you can see the number of hours that you've committed to spending on these subsections over here. So why did we do that? We spent about 1,000 hours building this. This is not something which is trivial. We had to analyze thousands and thousands of enhanced score reports to be able to do this. We had to build in logic. We had to put in data from about 40,000 students to do this. So it took a lot of time. But the reason we built this, so that each one of you can create your own personalized study plan, a study plan that's better than what a private tutor would provide to you in less than 7 minutes. We launched this tool in March of this year, and since March, our students have created upwards of 10,000 personalized study plans. Not 4, not 5, but 10,000 personalized study plans. In fact, you need help doing this, go to gmatplanner.com and we'll help you do that. So, let me move forward. The next piece is learning concepts. Now remember, when you learn concepts, a private tutor teaches you concepts and gives you feedback on each and every concept. Our e-GMAT learning platform is designed to do that. What you see over here is concept files, and each concept file has a built-in assessment. This assessment gives you feedback on how well you've learned that concept. It even tracks the amount of time you've spent on it. And at the end of each concept file, you get feedback based on the score that you get, whether you need to revise that or whether you can move forward. Okay. Again, overall in the entire critical reasoning course, you actually get feedback about 90 times just on the learning part of the course. And you compare this to another popular course. This is the course by Magoosh. Again, on the subject verb side of things, there are a few things that you're going to notice. First, it's not as comprehensive, nearly not as comprehensive. The second thing, there is no feedback. And then even this time over here is the length of video. It's not the time that you actually spent on it. The next thing is teaching you how to apply those concepts. And again, remember, a private tutor, once you understand a few concepts, teaches you how to apply those concepts. At e-GMAT, we built a specific entity called application file. The moment we teach you a few concepts, we teach you how to apply those concepts. This file tells you, when you're applying the subject verb as a concept, what do you need to do in step 1, step 2, and step 3. As you move further along in the course, remember, this is module 2 over here. It combines the prior concepts and teaches you how to apply that. Again, it's the same approach that we build upon. Then we evaluate you on your ability to apply those concepts, not just on e-GMAT questions, but also on official questions. And this, again, is specific application, personalized feedback that's provided to you. When you look at the Magoosh offering, you're not going to find any application file over there. You're not going to find any assessment. In fact, you'd see a practice quiz, but again, there are no scores. The intent is not to give you feedback, just to give you some practice. The last piece is evaluation of mastery. So you've been studying all of this. Now you get feedback at subject verb, you get feedback at modifiers, you get feedback at parallelism, you get feedback at comparison, you get feedback at verbs, and so on and so forth. But how do you know you've hit that 90th percentile in sentence correction? And to do that, we built this tool called Scholarinium, which has what we call as an ability quiz. You take an ability quiz, you get an ability score, and then you also get analytics as to where you're not performing well. Clearly, in this case, this particular student needs to buckle up his abilities in comparison. If he focuses on improves on comparison, he or she can move to that 90th percentile ability in sentence correction. So you can really see why is it that we say most of the other courses are built around that book-based architecture, whereas e-GMAT's built around that private tutoring-based approach. So, and why is it that, a majority of the people who write their success stories on GMAT Club credit e-GMAT for their success? With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, connect with me on my LinkedIn, connect with us on our YouTube. We actually publish about 5 to 6 articles on our LinkedIn. We also publish about 4 to 5 videos, learning and success story videos on our YouTube channel every week. Okay, with that, let's move forward to the core of this webinar, which is how do you pre-think assumptions. So now that we go into the core of this webinar, we're going to follow this particular approach. First is you're going to understand how do you approach critical reasoning questions today. Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise. We'll do 2 arguments over there. Then we'll do 2 full-length questions over there. And we're going to do these questions as a quiz. You're going to apply pre-thinking over there. And once you've put in your answers, I'm going to go through a detailed review of these questions. I'm going to apply the negation test. Then from there on, we're going to look at, hey, how do you become a skilled pre-thinker? Where can you get more practice? What all should you do so that you get the most out of the time that you've spent in this particular webinar? So at a very high level, we'll document how you prepare today. We'll recognize what is important to master assumptions, and we'll present your should-be approach to master CR assumptions. Okay. So with that, let's discuss your current approach in GMAT critical reasoning. And I'm going to present 2 methodologies to you. But before that, I want to make sure that you understand what pre-thinking is. Pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before you look at the answer choices. So you see the 3 fingers, one potential assumption in 15 seconds before you look at the answer choices. These 3 things are essential for a skilled pre-thinker. Now, when you are beginning in your journey towards pre-thinking, you may not be able to do pre-thinking in 15 seconds. You may take about a minute to do pre-thinking, and that's okay. Okay, but you always need to do pre-thinking before you look at the answer choices. Once you start looking at the answer choices, you can throw pre-thinking out of the window. And the reason why it's really important is because there's a lot of misnomers around what pre-thinking is. A lot of people think pre-thinking is the same as predicting the answer. No, it is not. We are not trying to predict the answer. In fact, the assumption that you may come up with may be different from what's there in the answer choices over there. However, the goal of pre-thinking is to make sure that you understand the logic that the author is using. The goal of pre-thinking is to make sure that your mind, when it reads the answer choices, is not swayed by the trap answer choices. If you do pre-thinking properly, you'd always be able to get to the right answer, even for 700 level questions. Okay, so how do you solve assumption questions today? 2 methodologies. Here are the ones over here. The methodology 1 says you read the argument, you go to the answer choices, and you come back to the argument till you reach the final candidate. Methodology 2 says you read the argument, you pre-think an assumption, and then evaluate the answer choices, referring to the argument only when needed. Put in your answers. I want to know which methodology do you follow. I have 145 students here. I want to see at least 100 answers, guys. And then once I have 100 responses, I will share the results. Right now, I have about 60, 65, 66, 70. One of the other things that I'd really say is, if you're there in the webinar, participate, because that's the best way you're going to get the most out of this webinar. Once you take a stand, you get feedback as to what you did was right or wrong. If you did right, then your beliefs would be reinforced. If you did wrong, you're going to ask the question, where did I make a mistake? Why did I make a mistake? Either way, you would benefit. Either way, you would learn. All right, so far I have 95 responses, 96, 97. Let's get 2 more responses, guys. All right, we have 100 responses. Which methodology do you follow? Let me broadcast results. And let me end the poll over here. 40% of you say methodology 1, which is a non-pre-thinking approach. 60% of you follow the pre-thinking approach. That's wonderful. That's good. Most of you follow the pre-thinking approach or want to follow that pre-thinking approach. So let's kind of see how we can move some of the people who don't follow the pre-thinking approach to the pre-thinking bucket. And those of you who follow, let's see how we can help each one of you to get to that 90th percentile. Okay. So where do you spend your time? If you follow the pre-thinking approach, where do you spend your time? Okay. The first choice is reading and understanding the argument. The second is pre-thinking. The third is selecting the correct answer. All right, wonderful. That is good. 95 responses without my prompting. That's good. 97. Let's get to 100 again. 99. 100. Perfect. That is great. So what is an assumption? To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an argument. I want you to tell me what is it that the author assumes over here. What is an assumption? Put in your answers. So here's an argument which says Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. What does the author assume? I have 4. You guys put the answer in the short answer part, which is towards the right of the presentation, not in the Q&A part. Okay, Q&A part is below the presentation. Do not put your answers over there. That part is purely for your questions. Okay, I have 30 responses in the short answer part. I'm going to share those results once I get about 50 responses here. That way we have enough responses that you guys can read, and not so many that you spend 10 minutes reading those. Okay. Lots of good responses. The cutoff is higher than 500, low score, lower the chances of admission. Ivy Leagues don't accept 500 and below. Okay, so some good, I'd say a number of good answers, some not so great answers. So let's kind of look at that. So here what's going on is the author gives a data point. It says, hey, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. And based on that data point, the author says, hey, based on this, there'll be no admission to an Ivy League college. So there's a logical jump when it comes to this. Okay, you have a score of 500 on the GMAT, and based on this, the author now takes, hey, based on this data point, the author claims that Joe will not be able to get admission into an Ivy League college. So when he makes that logical jump, he makes that assumption. What is the assumption? That a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Most of you got this right, except the fact that you basically said that, hey, 500, no one who gets into an Ivy League college has a score below 500. Now remember, an assumption is tied to the conclusion. Therefore, the assumption has to be for someone like Joe. Why? Because the author is not claiming that the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get admission into an Ivy League college. The author is claiming that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. Really important distinction. Why? Even though over here it may not seem like a big thing, on more complex arguments, you have to make sure that the assumption is talking about the entity that the conclusion is talking about, not another entity. Why? Because if it's talking about another entity, it becomes out of scope. All right, so what does this mean with regards to the core definition of an assumption? An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So there are certain things about an assumption. One is that it must provide new information. Why do we say that? Because it is an unstated idea. And the second is it must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Now, who can tell me what does this must be true mean? What does this must be true mean? Who can explain? And you can put your answers in the short answer pod. Okay. As someone who's seen one of my sessions says load bearing wall. Okay. All right. 18 answers. For a given scenario, conclusion should be true. Resolution assumption is not true, and the conclusion breaks. So some really, really good answers. And I want you to make sure you remember those answers as we solve questions. Why? Because you would be attracted by some crap answer choices. You would select some crap answer choices. And if you want to avoid doing that, that's one distinction I want to make sure you remember, which is that an assumption is something that makes sure that the conclusion doesn't break down or the conclusion remains true. Okay, that is the must be true aspect of the assumption. So when you're choosing an answer choice, always ask yourself, is that required for the conclusion to remain true? Or in other words, if this is not true, will the conclusion truly break down? And just to really do that, let's kind of look at the load-bearing wall piece, which someone really said. So think of this argument as this house where the conclusion is this roof. Now you see these three pillars that are holding that roof upright. Now these three pillars are what I call as premises in the argument. They all make that roof stronger, but not all of them are required. Only one of them is required to keep the roof upright, and that essential pillar, which is the central pillar, is your assumption. Now some of you may say, but an assumption is not there in the argument. I agree with that, but the point over here is it's that piece that bears the load of the conclusion. It's something which is essential for this roof, the conclusion, to stay upright. So when you're evaluating a statement as to say, is this an assumption? Ask yourself, is this an essential pillar? Is it required for the conclusion to remain valid? One of the other inferences out of this is that you need to understand what the conclusion really is saying. Who is the conclusion about, or what is the conclusion about, and what is it trying to say? If you don't understand the conclusion, you'll have a very hard time figuring out what the assumption should be. Okay. So to be very clear, what does must be true mean? It means that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can break down. There's a scenario that exists which will invalidate the conclusion. Or, as you guys said, the assumption must be there to hold that roof, the conclusion, upright. So let's kind of look at how the assumption prevents the conclusion from breaking down, or what does falsification of that conclusion mean. Okay, so I'm going to use the same poll. How can this conclusion be destroyed? The conclusion over here is that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. How can we destroy this conclusion? Or under what scenario will this conclusion be destroyed? Under what scenario? Okay, if Joe gets admitted to an Ivy League college with a score of 500, or another person who's similar to Joe gets admitted with a score of 500. Okay, that is true. So good, you guys understand that. So the conclusion is falsified when Joe gets admission with a score of 500, right? That's a scenario in which the conclusion is falsified. Let me ask this question and make sure that everyone's clear with that. Is that true? If Joe gets admission with a score of 500, then the conclusion is falsified. Right? Everyone gets that. Or pretty much everyone. If you don't get it, you can put your question in the short answer pod. That is great. So how do we evaluate whether an answer choice is correct? Now, in this case, we already know the correct answer choice, so we're going to evaluate that. The correct answer choice was a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. And we ask ourselves, is this must be true, which means will the conclusion break down if the statement to the left, which is this particular statement, no longer holds true? So when a statement, when we say if this statement no longer holds true, then what holds true is its negated instance by definition. And I'm going to explain that. So if we say this statement no longer holds true, then what we are also saying is that this statement automatically holds true, which is that statement, a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable to Ivy League schools. If that happens, then what happens to the conclusion? Does it break down? Yes, because if a score of 500 becomes acceptable, then the author cannot say with 100% surety that Joe will not get admission into Ivy League schools. Okay, and what we just did was not rocket science. What we just did was we applied the negation test. Okay, now some of you may be asking, how can we say that when a statement is not true, its negated instance automatically becomes true? All right, let's just see how we can say that. Let's kind of look at some statements over here. Okay, but remember this, if you say a statement is not true, then by definition its negated instance becomes true. Examples, if you say Harvard has the best MBA program, and if you say that statement is not true, essentially what you're saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or an MBA program which is as good as or better than Harvard exists. Okay, John runs faster than David. If you say this statement is not true or this doesn't exist, then what you're also saying is that, hey, David is as fast or faster than John. Can you see when you say a particular statement is not true, its negated version automatically becomes true? Can you see that? All right. I'm going to make the presentation part slightly bigger. That way you guys can see get a bit more real estate for those of you who are watching on small screens. So just to summarize, if an answer choice is truly must be true, which means it's a correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of that negated version. Why? Because the definition of assumption states that it's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. If it's an incorrect answer choice, and my presentation eats out I's over here, that's why you see the I missing over here. If it's an incorrect answer choice, which means if it's not must be true, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of the negated version. That's as simple as that. Correct answer choice, conclusion breaks down in the presence of negated version. Incorrect answer choice, conclusion does not break down. Okay, let's kind of look at that. Let's look at an answer choice. It says a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Okay, and we're going to ask ourselves, is that must be true? Will the conclusion become invalid, or which means Joe would get admission if the statement to the left no longer holds true? So the negated instance of this is a score of 500 on the GMAT is a good score. And if that is true, what happens to the conclusion? Does Joe get admission? Absolutely not. Why? Because Joe's admission is not built on the condition whether the score of 500 is considered to be a good score or not. It is simply on that number 500, not how we qualify that number. Okay, the logic of the argument would remain the same when you replace 500 by 700 or 750. That's how the logic of the argument is built. Okay. So essentially, what must be true does is it helps you narrow down. For the correct answer choice, the conclusion breaks down when you negate that answer choice. For the incorrect answer choice, conclusion continues to hold true when you negate this answer choice. Okay. Alexander, Alexander is asking a question which it's a great question. Which shows that he is thinking, um, and, uh, and 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 Alexander, I have answered. I don't want to take that particular logic right now, probably in 30 minutes, because I think for the group, it may not be, it's a sophisticated enough logic. What he's saying is GMAT the only thing that's important when it comes to getting admission to Ivy school? So is that a must be true statement? Simple answer, it's not a must be true statement. But we're going to really see why that's not a must be true statement in about 20 minutes. I also have this question answered on our YouTube channel. So if you want to just go there and see that, that's something that you can also see. But the simple answer is it's not. Okay, so we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise. Now we're going to make the logic a bit more sophisticated, not just two-line arguments, but real GMAT-like arguments. And we're going to pre-think right now. Okay. So what is it that I'm going to do? I'm going to give you an argument. I'm going to give you the short answer part. So you'll just have an argument, no answer choices. Excuse me. And you're going to put in your pre-thinking. I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes. So don't worry about timing. Read the argument slowly and tell me what the assumption is going to be. Then I'm going to tell you how to pre-think. What method do I use to pre-think? What method do we teach in our session, in about the 10 to 15 video lessons that we have on just assumptions in our course to pre-think. And then we're going to evaluate some of the submissions that you provided. Okay. But by the end of this example, you already know what an assumption is. You already know what it does. You would know exactly how to go about coming up with assumptions or pre-thinking assumptions. Okay. And the other thing that this argument would do is if you have any doubts still after the first question, a lot of those doubts do get cleared by the end of this one. So what are some of the core skills that you need? The first and the most important core skill is what we teach in our premise and conclusion file, which is how do you identify facts and claims? An argument can have multiple claims, but only one main conclusion. So you need to know how to identify that. You need to be able to understand precisely what the conclusion is saying and the logic with which the author is arriving at that conclusion. Now, number 4 is something that you already know, which is what is an assumption. Okay. Now, why do people falter? Why is it that they're unable to pre-think? The first and the most important reason why they don't do that is they worry about time. Don't worry about time when you're learning how to pre-think. Focus on comprehending. Okay. Focus on asking the right questions so that you understand the logic of the argument. The people who falter worry about time, don't read the argument properly, and number 3, they don't ask the right questions, which gets them the logic of the argument. Okay. Now with that, I'm going to give you the first argument. I'm going to just reduce the width over here so that we have enough for a short answer part. I'm going to move my video away, and here is your short answer pod in which you can put your answers in. And one thing which I want to make sure you do is you have a pen and paper ready. So if you don't have one, make sure you get a pen and paper. I mean, I'm going to give you 30 extra seconds to do that because it will truly help you break that argument down. And here is your first argument. All right, you guys have 3 minutes or ton of time to come up with an All right, guys, another 30 seconds. So I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. I have about 20 responses so far. Let's get. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Um, One of the most important things, let me just broadcast results. One of the most important things when I look at, something uh, like this, where I'm asking you guys to pre-think, is the quality of effort that you guys are putting in. And I was looking at that the quality of responses that are coming in. And when I say quality, it's about the variety of responses that I see. It's about the originality of the thought process, regardless of whether the logic is correct or not. And as I read these responses, I can really see that you can see the diversity over here. You can see the diversity of thought process. You can see that it requires an effort to be able to come up with this. So I want to thank you guys uh, for doing this, okay, and putting in the effort. And I also want to encourage you to continue to put in the effort. Now, some of the responses that are here are fairly good. There are about 25% of the responses are very good. They seem to be close to what the correct answer would be. The other 75% are away from it. But the nice thing is you guys are trying, which is good. That's all that I ask you to do. All right. So how do I go about approaching this question? You know, the first step I figure out is what is the conclusion and what is the author trying to say in the conclusion? Why? Because if I understand what the conclusion is, then I know what is it that I need to preserve. What is the role of that assumption going to be? Then I figure out the logic of the argument, understand how the author arrives at the logic. Then I pre-think what the answer is. And then that's kind of where the secret sauce is, which is how do you go about pre-thinking? What question do you ask that makes the assumptions jump out at you? And once you do all of that, assumptions should jump out at you. So let's see, what question do we need to ask to get the assumptions? So now remember, an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which means an assumption prevents the conclusion from breaking down. If that's what it is, then without the assumption, the conclusion will truly break down. I mean, just generic simple inference from it. So, which means that the assumption has to be built around those scenarios that break the conclusion down. Why? Because the assumption is that pillar that is preventing that roof from caving down. So we have to figure out the scenarios that the assumption must save the conclusion from, and to figure out that we have to figure out scenarios that break the conclusion down. If we figure out these are the conditions under which the conclusion breaks down, all we need to say is the assumption simply says those conditions will not exist. Okay, so this is what we call as a falsification method. We ask the question, which is under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? Okay, if the answer to those circumstances is where the assumptions are going to be built. That's as simple as that. There's no rocket science to it, but there's a logic to it which comes from that very definition of assumption. Okay. Now, here is the argument. The first question that I have for you, and I'm going to move this out over here, is remember, an assumption is supposed to preserve the conclusion. So you have to figure out which statement is the main conclusion. Which statement is the main conclusion? And I'm going to show you three statements on the next slide. Now, there are four answer choices here. Do not choose statement 4 because statement 4 doesn't exist. Choose between statements 1, 2, and 3. I use this same poll for another argument which has 4 statements. So the question is, which statement is the main conclusion? Which statement do you need to save? And that's really important. Which statement is the main conclusion? All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. But 52% of the class says statement 2 is the main conclusion, and you would be absolutely correct. But what I also see is that the other 48% consider statement 1 or statement 3 to be the main conclusion, which I am not so happy about. Now remember, what's the job of the main conclusion? Or what does the main conclusion do? What is the definition of the main conclusion? In other words, a main conclusion, the role of main conclusion needs to be what is it that the author wants you to believe? What's the takeaway from this argument? Okay, what is it that the author wants you to believe? That is what the main conclusion needs to be. Okay, it advocates the main point to convey the belief of the argument. All right, let's just make sure that we have the proper annotation over here. Okay. All right, statement 2 over here is the main conclusion. Okay, this is what the author is trying to assert. Now, a lot of people think statement 1 is the main conclusion. Why? And let me actually bring the screen closer to me so I can interact with it. And as I do that, you're going to see the roof. So I'm going to pause my video over here. Okay, so a lot of people think statement 1 is the main conclusion. Why? Because they see this fact that a recently published paper concludes. They see this word concludes and they already say, hey man, statement 1 needs to be the main conclusion. No, the main conclusion in an argument always belongs to the author. And when you think about what is it that the author wants you to believe, you're going to find that statement 2 is what the author wants you to believe. Also, statement 2 has a conclusion marker, which we talk about in our premise and conclusion files, which is the word clearly. Okay. Now, some of you are confused. Why is it that this particular statement is not the main conclusion? And the statement is the criterion for rewarding faculty places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Now, you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose in this? What is the role played by statement 3 in this argument? Is statement 3 written to support statement 2? Okay, if you're confused between statement 2 and 3, you have to ask yourself, is statement 3 written to support statement 2, or is statement 2 written to support statement 3? And when you ask that question, the answer would be that 3 is written to support statement 2 over here. And because 3 is written to support statement 2, statement 2 becomes your main conclusion. Statement 3 is a supporting statement which is written to support statement 2. All right. And yes, Piyush, the camera did get out of position because I was writing on the screen and I had to tilt the screen towards me. Now, half the class who really was confused that statement 1 or 3 is the main conclusion. Is that clear to you guys now? And you can write yes or no in the poll question. Okay, now really important. Let's go. My next question over here is about statement 3. My next question is about statement 3 over here, and whose reward system does statement 3 discuss? Does it discuss the reward system of tenured faculty? Does it discuss the reward system of lecturers? Does it discuss both their reward systems? Whose reward system does statement 3 discuss is the question, and this is statement 3 for those of you. Let's get a few more responses. The question is, whose reward system does statement 3 discuss? All right, perfect. I have 71 responses. Let's get to about 80 responses, guys. Whose reward system does statement 3 discuss? Come on, once again. 3, 2, 1. Let's end the poll. 80% of you say tenured faculty. That is true. Statement 3 discusses the reward system for tenured faculty and not for both. And to clarify that, this word greater, all right, this word greater, what does it compare? What does this word greater compare? Can you type in your answers? Research and teaching for whom? Research versus teaching for whom? For just for tenured faculty. Just for tenured faculty. That is great. Now, do we know anything about the reward system for full-time lecturers? No, we don't know anything about the reward system of full-time lecturers. I want to make sure that that point is absolutely clear, because a lot of people, when they read this argument, they automatically assume that full-time lecturers have vastly different reward system, and which is not as what's stated in the argument itself. Okay, so let's ask our pre-thinking question, and as we ask this question, you're going to see assumptions jump out at you. Under what circumstances will the conclusion break down given all of these facts in the argument? And when you translate that, what you really say is, under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance between tenured faculty and full-time lecturers, given that what we know is that full-time lecturers enhance student performance more than professors do, and the reward system for professors places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Now, there's something which is very important that I want you to notice. Okay, the author is not disputing the conclusion which is made by the research report. What it's saying is, under what circumstances should we not blame the reward system? Okay, that's how, if we figure out that the difference in performance is not because of the reward system, then the conclusion would break down. Can you see that? The answer to this question would break the conclusion down. And who gave the answer? LFA. Great response. If the reward system for non-tenured also puts greater emphasis on research than on teaching, that will break the conclusion down. Really great answer. Okay, what are the possible scenarios in which the conclusion is falsified? If non-tenured faculty has the same reward system that tenured faculty does, then you can't blame the reward system. Okay, or if most tenured professors don't act as per the reward system, you can give someone a certain reward system, but what if they don't care about the reward system? Then you can't blame the reward system. So both of these, first of all, falsification scenarios, both of these break the conclusion down. Everyone agrees? We'll look at the skill level. Don't worry. First of all, let's just focus on this. Everyone agrees. Both of these, if this is true, you can't blame the reward system. Let's get a few more yeses. If these two are true, you can't blame the reward system. And there are other scenarios too. There are about 5 or 6 falsification scenarios that I can come up with. Okay. Now, if this breaks the conclusion, then okay, what are the assumptions? The assumption is, one of the assumptions is that non-tenured faculty does not have an identical reward system, or most tenured professors care about the reward system. These are assumptions. Now, I know you have other, you guys have other breakdown scenarios or falsification scenarios as well. But one thing that I want to make sure that you understand this is, once you ask the falsification question, then you can see you can really see how assumptions become simple, right? This is very different from what you guys had written, but it wasn't complex. Now, let's talk about the skill level. What you're talking about when you come to skill level is what I assume is that the skill level of both professors and full-time lecturers is identical in impacting student learning, and that is a correct assumption as well, which is there's nothing else what you're really going towards. There's nothing else that explains the difference in learning. Now, in generic world, that is something you might get as an answer choice in a question, but in the real world GMAT scenario, that's just too easy an answer choice. You're not likely to see nothing else is responsible. Okay. Ankur says, is it assumed that the published paper is describing a correct fact? I wouldn't say it's assumed, it's given as a fact. Why? Because the author is not disputing that. Okay. If you read the argument, the author is not disputing what the published paper says. What it's saying is what is causing the results of the paper. So it's not assumed, it's taken as a fact. And if you go into a premise and conclusion files, that distinction is a very important distinction. Will tell you what is it that you can dispute in an argument, what is it that you should take in as a fact. And again, Yogesh, if you have another specific question, you should put them over here, put that over here. So I'm going to move forward from this because we have to do 3 more questions here. But a lot of you have been asking questions about negation and other pieces. We've written probably what is the most sophisticated literature in terms of negation when it comes to critical reasoning. And this is an article on GMAT Club. It has upwards of 100 kudos, so you guys can click on it or just Google it, negation test series e-GMAT, and you should be able to get to it. Let me see. I think we have it. As a part of the web links too. So, and when we give you the PDF, you'd be able to get that. So, all right. So with regards to pre-thinking and timing, how many of you are wondering, man, this seems to take a lot of time? How many of you are wondering, this seems to take a lot of time? Doesn't seem like it. Good. Okay. So here's how you're going to feel as your pre-thinking journey as it goes. Okay. Let's say you are this guy who's starting at this point number 1 over here. Okay. What you're going to find is as you start as you start learning pre-thinking, 2 things are going to happen. One is your time to answer questions will go up. The second thing is your accuracy will improve. Okay. And a lot of people, when that happens, they don't really say, man, I'm solving more questions correctly. What they're going to really say is, oh God, why the hell am I following this method when it takes longer? And at that point in time, I would just say, trust the process, continue pre-thinking. Okay. As you continue to do that, again, 2 things will happen. Your accuracy will continue to improve. Your time to answer questions will go down. And then you'd say, now I understand why people say pre-thinking is probably the most important skill that you need to learn when it comes to GMAT verbal. And as you continue to do that, once you get to point 3, you'll always do pre-thinking. Why? Because you're into that perpetual loop where the more you pre-think, the more time you save, the better you perform. And you'd never give up on it. In fact, if you give up on it on that odd chance, you're going to curse yourself. Why the hell did you give up on it? Why? Because you're going to take longer if you give up on pre-thinking. You're going to make more mistakes, and essentially that's kind of where you'd be. This is we call as a level 1, level 2, level 3 pre-thinker. Okay, and here are some examples. So I talked about that 65% of all success stories on GMAT Club share GMAT experience talk about mention e-GMAT. Each one of them mentions pre-thinking. In fact, 75% of all success stories, in fact, those who are not even e-GMAT students, mention pre-thinking as a method. And here's some of those terms over here. Okay. Understand the passage completely. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think an answer before looking at the answer choice. And this guy says probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. Now, once you get the PDF, look at this. Debrief, not just because of pre-thinking, but also because how this guy plans his GMAT attempt. It's just the planning, the use of data in planning his GMAT attempt is just beautiful over here. So there's another guy who actually wrote a success story last week. He improved from a 30th percentile in critical reasoning to a 98th percentile in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 30th to 98th. Okay, he says answer CR questions as if there is no answer choices. Pre-thinking is a game changer. And then he says when it gets to 700 level questions, you have to do pre-thinking. The reason to do pre-thinking is to help you focus on the logic and not deviate from the key argument when trap or out of scope answer choices show up. Okay. This guy improved from a V34, and when he had a V34, his CR percentile ability was 30th percentile to a V42 when he got to that 98th percentile. And you can download his ESRs, they are there in this link. Okay, there's another one. He says this pre-thinking primes the mind, and we are constantly on our toes while reading an RC paragraph or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we keep speculating that in which direction the passage will orient or what logical jump has the author taken. This guy improved 220 points in his GMAT preparation. Okay. Now, this second example, very interesting example. It's a full-length question. It's an official question. I'm going to give you 3 minutes for this one. If you pre-think, if you ask the precise question, you're going to get to the correct answer. And the reason why I specifically say that is because there are some very close answer choices over here. So if you don't pre-think, those close answer choices will confuse you. But if you pre-think, if you understand what is the definition of an assumption, you're going to get to the correct answer very easily. Okay, I'm going to again pause myself, remove the video, let me put in the answer choices, move everything away, get your pen and paper ready. Now we're going to go on a roll. We've done all the theory that we needed to do. We are simply going to solve questions and apply pre-thinking. All right, here's the question. You guys have 3 minutes. All right, another 15 seconds, guys. And this seminar is going to be another 45 minutes from now. So we're just picking up pace right now. Another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me pause my timer. End the poll. Broadcast the results. We have a split jury. Choice B, most popular, 36% correct. 36% if you got it. It is the correct answer. Choice B, rarely popular, about 30%. Choice C also popular. Choice D also popular. And I have poll questions here where someone's saying, where people are saying, hey, I think choice B is the correct answer. Some of you are saying choice D is the correct answer. So as I mentioned, this is A, unofficial question. B, this is a question in which if you do not focus on the conclusion, if you do not ask the pre-thinking question, you will be confused. And the results and the data clearly shows that many of you are. So let's kind of get to it. And once we go through the process, the important thing is the process. Why? Because if you follow the process, you're going to get to the right answer every time. And the beauty of this is if you don't follow the process, or if you falter while following the process, you're going to precisely know where you're faltering. All right. So what's the conclusion here? What is my conclusion? The correct answer is choice E. Okay, but I know statement number 2 is the conclusion. Thank you for that. But what precisely is, what is the content of the conclusion? What is the commissioner claiming? The commissioner is claiming is that the revenue will be at least 50% higher this year. Okay, revenue will increase by at least 50%. That is my conclusion. Okay, why is the commissioner saying that? Because he says I'm going to increase this toll by 50%, and the current amount is 10 cents per mile. Okay, so two things to observe, and you actually have the argument up there. Now, how do you estimate annual revenue? How do we estimate annual revenue? What's the formula? It's the toll per mile into the number of miles. That's perfect. Annual revenue is the toll per mile multiplied by the total number of miles traveled. Can everyone see this? It's not revenue minus, it's not cost. That's not revenue. That's profit, by the way. Number of miles. Okay. Now, what the commissioner is claiming is that this is going to go up by 50%, at least 50%. Now, what do we know? What do we know? Out of this part over here on the right hand side, what do we know? That the toll is increasing by 50%. Okay. So we know that the toll per mile is going to go up by 50% over here. That's something that we already are aware. Okay. We know that toll per mile has gone up by 50%. So we're going to ask ourselves, under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by 50%, provided that we know that the toll per mile is going to go up by 50%. What is the circumstance? Under what circumstances can that happen? Can you put in the answer? Under what circumstances if the total number of miles goes down or stays flat, right? The total number of miles goes down or stays flat. That's the only scenario. So what is the assumption? The total number of miles driven will not decrease, or it will go up slightly, and to be more precise. Is that clear? Okay, now let's look at the answer choices. Which answer choice attacks the total number of miles? Choice E. choice E, the last one, yes, which is your correct answer. Now I'm going to let you look at why choice B is not the correct answer. Let me actually put in the right annotation here. But it's very easy to see why choice E is the correct answer, because it attacks exactly what the argument's talking about. You now understand why I say focus on the conclusion. And Murray is asking, what level of question is it? Given the fact that you only have 35% accuracy for this one, so it's a 700 level question. Any question where the accuracy is lower than 50% is a 700 level question. Okay, let's look at choice B. A lot of you chose choice B. All right. Choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. Okay. The question that you have to ask ourselves is, does this mean that the total number of miles traveled on the toll roads will decrease? Does this definitely mean that? No, it does not. Okay. If it does not mean that, then is that a must be true statement? Is that a must be true statement? Not might. Remember, the definition of an assumption is it must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. Not might be true. It must be true. Remember, I said in the beginning of the webinar, remember that definition. Okay. The total number of miles may still remain the same, may even increase if the miles per trip increase. So this is not a must be true statement. It's an attractive answer choice. Why? Because it's a strengthener. Okay. It's not an assumption, and that's the difference between a strengthener and an assumption statement. So that's a whole different thing. But the only thing that you have to ask yourself is that a must be true statement? Is that required for my conclusion to remain true, that the total number of trips remain the same? And the answer to that is no. Even if the total number of trips decrease by 5%, it can always be compensated by an increase in length of trip. Okay, let's look at choice C. Choice C actually does the other way around. It says the average length of the trip. Sorry, wrong annotation. Choice C talks about the average length of the trip made. Again, ask the same question. Ask the same question. Is that a must be true statement? Is it necessary that the average length of the trip remain the same? Is it? No. Why? Because then it can be compensated by more trips. You could have more trips. Okay, so that's why choice C is not the correct answer. Similarly, choice D for the exact same reason is not the correct answer. The number of drivers increasing doesn't necessarily mean the total number of miles will go down. Why? Because even if 5% more drivers avoid the highway, the same drivers who are not taking the highway could take more trips to make up for those miles. Okay, so you can really see why when you do pre-thinking, when you ask that falsification question, you focus on the precise thing. Sham says, can other costs bring revenue down? Sham, costs usually in the context of what you're doing do not have an impact on revenue. They have an impact on profits, not on revenue. Okay, not directly at least. Pricing could have an impact on revenue, not costs. Okay, now we're going to move towards full length questions. Now, one of the other things is a couple of you have been saying that the signal becomes weak. Now, remember this, guys, because we're doing video here, you need about 300 kilobits per second. Okay, if you don't have a dedicated 300 kilobits per second, you will see the sound go up and down. Okay, let me just summarize once again. If a conclusion is a statement that must be true, for the an assumption is a statement that must be true for the conclusion to hold true, which means it is required to be true for the conclusion to hold true. It is not a statement that might be true. Okay. Now, given this argument, one thing which is absolutely clear, and let me pause my video because I need to tilt my screen, is that for the conclusion to remain true, one thing that we need is and let me just write this, we need the total number of miles. We want this to not decrease, or I would say slightly increase. So increase slightly. And forgive me, I can't write very fast over here. We want this to increase slightly, and for that to happen, you can't really say that the average length of trip will not decrease from its current level. Why? Because the average length of trip decreases, then if you have more trips, that could compensate for that. If the total number of trips decreases, then the length of trip could concentrate. So remember, miles, or in other words, let me just put in this formula. Let me just type in over here. Total miles, let's see. Miles is equal to total miles is the product of number of trips multiplied by the length of trip. Okay, so if one goes down, the other can compensate. Is that clear, Fasa? Total miles is this. So any answer choice which says one will go down is not a must be true. Why? Because the other can compensate. Okay, so this was a difficult question. Now we're going to go towards more difficult questions. All right, I'm going to give you, for the first question, I'm going to give you, I usually give about 4 minutes, but the way I do this is I let you guys time yourself. So what I want you to do is select this answer choice that says not answered. So what it means is it tells me how many of you are actually going to attempt this question. So when you choose another answer choice other than not answered, when 80% of you choose another answer choice, I then call time. Okay, so choose not answered. I want at least 60 of you to choose not answered. I have 26, a total of 29, 30, 35, 37, 40, 42, 44. Well, closer to 50. How many of you have chosen this one? Let's just see. RDS Technologies, 53. Let's get to 60 responses, guys. I want you guys to choose not answered. Okay, don't choose other answer choices because you haven't seen the question as of yet. All right, 60 of you have chosen not answered. Here is your question. All right. All right, guys, get those answers in. 80% of the class is done. We need to move to the next question as well. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. You can see choices A and D are very popular. Choice B is popular as well, and so is choice C. And thank you for that amazing participation. Now we're going to go to the next question. I'm going to solve both these questions together, and then I'm going to share the responses. So you guys know the drill now. You have to select not answered first. Excuse me, select not answered, and then I'm going to show the poll question once I get at least 60 people who select not answered. 3, 2, and one more response. Okay, 61. Good. And here is your next question. I'm going to mute. Okay, guys, get those responses, and 80% of the class is done. I'm going to give you another 5 to 7 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Broadcast the results. 40% of you chose choice D, which was the correct answer. Choices C and E are also very popular. That's really good. So good participation. Let's make sure that each one of you can get these questions right. These were difficult questions, I'd say that. Okay, both of these were 700 level questions. So you know, if you got them right, pat yourself on the back. If you didn't get them right, just tell yourself you're going to learn pre-thinking. You're going to be able to see how easy does pre-thinking make these questions. So first question, probably the most difficult question you're going to really see. Why difficult? Not because of the logic, not because of the complexity, but because of the number of different terms that are there in this. So that kind of makes this question slightly difficult. Um, so let's kind of go through this over here. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion in this is that the number of Erlanders, number of V's we call them, it's just easier to do that when I call them V's, receiving special program information did not go up significantly in this over here. Okay, so there are two things to observe over here. One is we're talking about these 2 years, 94 to 96. The second thing which is there is that we're talking about special program. We're not talking about any program, but we're talking about special program. Can you guys see this? The conclusion is about two things. One is um, special program. The second is about these two years. Okay. All right. Now, how many of you observed this and kind of put this in your mind while you were solving the question? How many of you put this in your mind while solving the question? And the reason I ask this because this is a complex argument. There's so many terms over here. And one of the things that happens when you have so many terms is we forget that piece that, hey, I've got to read the conclusion twice. I've got to focus on the conclusion. So if you did not do that, then in that case, I would truly recommend that you do it. Okay, let's kind of understand the logic of this argument over here. So in this, the author really says, why does the author say that the number of Erlanders who are receiving special program information kind of remain constant between the years 94 to 96? Why? Because a few things happened. One is the number of receiving radios, the radios that people have in their houses on which they listen to special programs, that remained the same between in this time frame. But the number of transmitting stations increased from 250 to 600. Okay, so the key thing over here is this increase from 250 to 600. This remained about the same overall, and you can see these two statements, these two facts go against each other. Why? Because they are separated by this word. However is a contrasting word. Okay, and then the first statement, probably really important in this context, is that radio stations with RDS technology broadcast special program information that only radios with RDS feature can receive. So essentially what this means is, hey, if you want to receive special programs, you need two things. One, the first thing that you need is a RDS radio. The second thing that you need is you need to be covered by a radio tower that has that special programming. So SPL tower, let's call it this way. And forgive my handwriting, that's the only way I can write on this. Okay. All right. Does everyone understand these things? Okay. Let's draw the logical structure of this. Logical structure, Between 94 and 96, very few additional overlanders received RDS or special programs. Why? Because between 94 and 96, the number of radios remained almost unchanged. The number of transmitting stations increased a lot. And the context is, to receive RDS programming, you need an RDS radio. All right. So now, our falsification question. The falsification question would be exactly the same structure. Under what conditions will there be a significant addition to the number of people receiving RDS programming if there are very few additional radios and if you have a lot more transmitting stations? So under what scenario can this happen? Will there be a significant addition to the number of people who are receiving special programming? Can you come up with scenarios? People are not buying more radios. The number of radios will remain the same. Okay, one is the reach has increased. Good. Number of radio listeners increase. Okay. Okay, there are two conditions, and you guys have listed both those conditions, which means once you get the logic, you can come up with falsification scenarios. Possible scenarios are, if the additional stations now cover those areas where people had the right kind of radio, but that where coverage was missing, or if we start putting these radios in Starbucks, so there are way more people per radio. So earlier there used to be one person per radio, now you have 5 people per radio. So now you can really say, hey, more people are now listening to special programming despite the same number of radios. All right. So can you see both the scenarios break the conclusion down? All right, if both these break the conclusion down, my assumptions are that the new stations did not increase the coverage significantly, and the people per radio, they remain almost the same. Okay, so these are my assumptions. Everyone okay with them? If you can do this, answer choices are a piece of cake. All right. Choice A in this case, I'm going to bring in over here. This is the poll response. 32% of you chose choice A. It was the most popular choice. It is the correct choice. Choice A says, and it's a complex choice, so I'm going to really simplify this for you. It says, few if any of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 1994 broadcast to people with the right kind of radios, RDS equipped radios, who were living in areas not previously reached by RDS stations. So let's kind of decode this answer choice. Again, this is an official answer choice. Few if any, the simplification of few if any is almost none. Of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94, what are the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94? These are my new stations. Remember the 250 to 600 increase? These are those. Broadcast to people. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. So if you're if you're now getting broadcast but were living in an area that wasn't previously reached, what's happening? Increase the range of RDS programming. And again, my I is eaten over here. There has to be an I over here. Okay, there has to be an I over here. So what this choice is saying is almost none of the new radio stations increase the coverage of RDS programming. Can you guys really see the simplified form from that complex form? Can you guys see the simplified form? Yes. And this is exactly in line with our pre-thinking, and this was the correct answer. Let's kind of do the negation test on this. If this was a choice explanation, the negated statement would be at least some radio stations increase coverage. If at least some radio stations increase coverage, then what's going to happen to my conclusion? If at least some radio station increase coverage over here, then what's going to happen to my conclusion? What is that negated version doing? More audience, number of listeners increase, okay, and which means the conclusion will break down, right? So then we pass the negation test. It will falsify the conclusion. Okay, um, let's kind of look at choice B. And I can bring the argument back. Let me just do that over here. Let me just bring the argument. Some of you are asking for the argument. RDS Technologies. So there was a great question here. But more audience doesn't mean more listeners. And that's where you have to look at the conclusion here. What does the conclusion say? And who put in the question? Let me just, this is a really good observation. Let me just view words. Sabina, really good observation. And that's where you focus on the conclusion and you can really say it's about receiving special program and not listening to it. Okay. Choice B, popular choice. All right. Now remember, what's the definition of an assumption? I'm going to remove my video over here. What is the definition of an assumption? It must be true for the conclusion to hold true, right? An assumption must be true for my conclusion to hold true. So let's go forward over here. So what is choice B saying? Choice B says in 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area had a radio equipped to receive RDS. We need to ask this question, is this must be true? That must be true that if you lived more than 50% of our landers who lived within the listening area had a radio equipped to receive RDS. Is that required for the conclusion to hold true? Remember, the conclusion is the number of people between 94 and 96 did not increase a whole lot. Is that required for that conclusion to hold true? Yes or no? No, it's not required. Even if 20% had an RDS equipped radio in the year 94 and the same 20% had an RDS equipped radio in the year 96, the conclusion will still hold true. This word most is not required, which is why this is not the correct answer. Choice C, not many of you chose this, so I'm going to ignore that. Okay. By the way, for those of you who are confused, you need an RDS technology to be able to listen to special programming. The range of a radio station that does not have RDS technology with regards to special programming is 0. Why? Because it can't even transmit special programming. Choice D was very popular. Okay, now what kind of programming is our argument about? Let's look at choice D, really popular. What kind of programming does the author care about in the argument? Special programming. What kind of programming does choice D mention? Any programming. Do we care about any programming in my conclusion? No. Had you focused on that aspect of the conclusion, you would have rejected choice D outright. Okay. Now, do we care about people who do not have the special radio? Can they even receive special programming? No, we can't. So the choice D, you should have rejected choice D outright. Okay. We don't care about people who do not have RDS radio. We don't care about any programming. It's completely out of scope. Okay. Choice E, type of programming, I don't care. I care about the number of people, not the kind of programming. That's kind of irrelevant. Now, one thing that was there was this was a difficult question, but if you understand the logic of the argument, only choice A was the correct answer. No other answer choice even came close to becoming the right answer. So when you think about difficult questions, a lot of people say you've got to choose an answer choice which is the best among the given options. No. GMAT critical reasoning. In fact, every aspect of GMAT verbal is very logic based. There will only be one correct answer. It may seem that the other answer choices are close because you don't have a proper understanding of the logic. Once you develop that proper understanding, you would see that every other answer choice is absolutely incorrect. Okay, let's kind of look at this one over here. And again, the focus is on the logic, the focus is on the process. What's going on over here? We had this thing that was collecting refuse, all right? Last year, we did not collect any refuse for recycling. What we did was we sent everything for incineration. Everything was burned down, okay? And so let's assume that one trash can is equivalent to one truck. How many trucks were burned down last year? How many trucks were burned down? 10 trucks. Yes, that's the amount of refuse that was burned down, and we got 10 trucks worth of burning of refuse in this thing, ash, residual ash. Okay, now if this year, what are we trying to do this year? How many trucks am I going to send if I collect the same amount of refuse? If I collect the same amount of refuse, how many trucks am I going to send in for incineration? If I collect the same amount of refuse, I'm going to save 5 for recycling. I'm going to send 5 for incineration. Now, here is the important question. What if instead of collecting the same amount of refuse, and listen to this carefully, instead of collecting the same amount of refuse, I collect 10 times as much refuse? In that case, how many trucks will I send for incineration this year if I get 10x the refuse this year? Read the argument carefully and then answer. How many trucks will I send for incineration if I collect 10 times the refuse? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. If I collect 100 trucks worth of refuse, how many trucks will I send for incineration? The answer choices are 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100. And I have 35 of you who responded to this. And what you've really said is that 70% of you have said 50. 70% of you would be wrong. The correct answer is 5 trucks. Why? Let's look at this. Let's look at the language in the passage. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So if last year I only sent 10 trucks over here, this year, regardless of the amount of refuse that I collect, I'm only going to send half as many trucks as I sent last year. Only half of this. Okay. I'm only going to send half as many trucks. Does this make sense? Do you see the beauty in language over there in the argument? Even if you collect 100 trucks worth of refuse for incineration, I'm only going to send half as many trucks. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go through this process. You guys know this. You guys are pros at this point in time. Here's the logical structure. Okay. And these words matter. That's the difference between a 650 and a 750. So we asked the same question: under what conditions will the ash generated be greater than 50% of what it was last year, even if we only send half as many trucks for incineration? If you're only going to send half as many trucks, what is the only condition under which the amount of ash generated is going to be more than 50%? What's the only condition? If more ash per truck, if you just fill those trucks so much that each truck generates a lot more ash. Okay, that's the only condition. Okay, if that's a falsification scenario, then the assumption really is that the ash per truckload remains similar to or lower than what it was last year. Okay, which is what choice D, which is the correct answer over here is. Let me just show how you polled over here. About 40% of you chose choice D. You are still confused between choices C and E over here. Okay, this year, choice A says this year no material that was separated for recycling will be incinerated. Okay, which means anything that's recycled will not be burned down. This is false. Why? Because this does not provide any new information. Uh, uh, it is something that you can infer from the argument itself. Choice B talks about the cost of separating doesn't matter. We only are concerned about the amount of residual ash, not the cost. Okay. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Do I care about the proportion of recyclable materials? Do I care? No. Why? Because I'm only going to send half as many truckloads, regardless of the amount of recyclable materials. So I don't care. It's irrelevant given the information. Okay. Choice D talks about the refuse generated per truckload. Uh, the ash generated per truckload. All right, it's in line with our pre-thinking. You can do the negated statement and you can see it breaks the conclusion down. Okay. Choice E talks about the total quantity of refuse. We already did that in that poll that I asked. The total quantity of refuse uh, is something which is irrelevant here. Why? Because we're only going to send half as many truckloads, even if you collect 10 times as much refuse. Okay, impact and conclusion is not there. Okay, very popular answer choice amongst you, but you now see why it's irrelevant. And who's saying that? Alexander says answer D is the only answer mentioned in the truckload, so it must be true. It is likely to be true. Just don't take that as the only way. I mean, I don't want to teach you tricks, guys. Why? Because tricks won't work consistently. They may work with a particular question, not otherwise. But I want to make sure that you get the skills required. Okay. So how do you become a CR champ? One thing which is clear is, hey, this isn't rocket science. We followed a process. We asked the same question again and again and again. As long as we understood the conclusion, as long as we saw the logic in the argument, you're able to get to the correct answer every time. The correct answer was the only answer that was correct every time. Okay. As you get to pre-thinking, you're going to achieve much higher accuracy and you're going to actually save a ton of time answering questions. You're going to love critical reasoning. It's probably the most important subsection in verbal with regards to, hey, the skills that it provides. Now, if you are a free user, if you're not a paid student, make sure you go through these files over here, which is Introduction to Assumption, Pre-thinking, Logical Gap, and Pre-thinking to Entities. It tells you how to pre-think for different argument types. Really important that you do that. These files overall are about 2.5 hours of content together. Okay, go through them. You're going to see the difference when it comes to approaching CR questions. And then take this quiz over here. Okay. If you are a paid student, which by the way, if you want to get to that 90th percentile, make sure you do. Make sure you build the right foundation. Make sure you go through each one of these core modules in this order, starting with an inference in which we'll tell you how to infer information from each and every statement. Then go through the assumption module, then go through evaluate, strengthen, weaken. In each of these modules, what you're going to find is you're going to find many concept files that teach you all the basics, that evaluate you every 30 minutes, that make sure you understand how do you extract information from one statement, from a combination of statements, that teach you how do you actually visualize when you get an argument that has multiple entities, that is an argument that's talking about segments, an argument that has numbers in it, and so on and so forth. And then it will teach you how to apply those concepts, not just on official questions, but also on a number of e-GMAT questions. You will get feedback that will tell you what you should do based on your score. Take that feedback in your stride. Okay. Once you're done with this, you should have reached 70th percentile. Then move on to Scholarium to practice questions to reach that 90th percentile. And throughout all of this, you'll have more than 500 e-GMAT created full and practice questions, not official. Official questions are additional. These are e-GMAT created original full and practice questions. And why is it that people succeed much more using this course? Why? Because this is designed to ensure learning. When you learn the concepts, get feedback on those concepts. When you learn the application right then and there, when you have these qualifying exercises that tell you whether you're applying the concept properly or not, you get feedback not at a critical reasoning level, not at a mock test level, but at an inference level, but at an assumption level, and so on and so forth. Here is the paid assumption module for the paid student. This is just the assumption module, not the entire CR course. And what you see over here is that you are learning how to do pre-thinking for all the various argument structures that the test can throw at you. Okay. Or in other words, you learn the basic concepts. You need level 1 you do level 1 pre-thinking. You do level 2 pre-thinking. Then you are evaluated over here. Okay. And then you apply those skills on official questions. So how do you get to those 100+ point score improvements? Make pre-thinking a second nature, or in fact, even a first nature to you. Don't time yourself while learning pre-thinking. Once you learn how to pre-think, you won't even need to time yourself because you'd be much faster. And practice questions as recommended. Go through the course properly and make sure that you hit more than 80% in every file. If you don't, revise that file, understand the mistake. As you course correct yourself right then and there, you're going to find that your confidence improves, your accuracy improves, your time to answer question automatically starts to go down. When you solve a question correctly or incorrectly, review the detailed solution. Our solutions are rarely detailed. We spend 2 hours creating each and every solution so that you guys can learn from where you made a mistake. Just to really tell you how comprehensive this is, it's many times more comprehensive than other popular solutions over there. Okay. With that, I've come to the end of this webinar. I want to thank you guys for joining me in this webinar. Here are some examples of people who've actually gone from let's say V32 in this case to 99 percentile on GMAT verbal in about 20 days or so. So Anupriya did about 20 days of diligent study. She was actually accepted into ISB within 10 days of applying. And again, this is not very hard. You can do all of this in about 10 days of diligent effort. Or when I say 10 days, I'm talking about 40 hours of diligent effort from a 30th percentile to an 80th to a 90th percentile. All right, guys, with that, we've come to the end of this webinar. Let me hide this. I'm going to share the session PDF with you. Here is the session handout. And if you can provide some feedback on the webinar, that would be great. You can provide the feedback in the short answer pod over here, Also, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those questions on. Can't you access the GMAT planner without purchasing the course? You can. You can schedule a call with one of our GMAT strategy experts and do that. Okay. And again, your questions, please, in the Q&A pod. That way I can see who it is. And again, if you can provide the feedback towards the right, which is right below the video, the short answer pod, that'd be great. Again, this recording will be there with you in about 12 hours. And we'll also upload it on our YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, then please do so. Let me just share the link to our YouTube channel. Here is the link to YouTube channel over here. Okay, guys, please don't provide your answers in the short answer pod, which is the pod on the right, because I can't respond to them. Okay, Shivani says, I've been scoring 100% in the medium CR questions. However, my accuracy is below 50% in hard level questions. Shivani, you're in a good place to begin with. I would say do a strategic review of CR. Let me just share a video for strategic review. And focus on the solutions. Okay, over here. What free resources do you have for non-students? There are a number of files in the free trial, Girish. You can go and take a look at them. Just log into your e-GMAT account and be able to get there. So just go to e-GMAT.com and you should be able to get there. Free resource. So here's a strategic review for CR. You can access. Alexander says, do you have any general tips on verbal time management? I have no problems in quant, but I struggle to finish on time for verbal. So Alexander, I would recommend that you figure out where you're taking longer and fix that. I mean, I can't really give you a set of tips for time management. Why? Because everyone's different. Everyone has that different, what we call a stuck time. Take an example of this student who scored improved from a 700 to 770. The reason he improved was because he focused his methods and critical reasoning, and that reduced the amount of time he took to answer CR questions. Girish says, or rather, I didn't. Preetham says, what's the typical score required for an Indian male engineer? It's a good question. Take a look at this article and it will tell you what's a good score for INSEAD for a typical Indian applicant. There are some examples here. Do you suggest taking a test to understand where you stand? Yes, we do. Take a Sigma X mock and we'd be happy to tell you how to go about doing that. So can you just buy the e-GMAT section? No, you can't just buy the e-GMAT section, but we do offer a monthly subscription plan. If you want that, you can write to rajat@e-gmat.com and say, hey, so that essentially people who just need to do one subsection, we offer them a monthly subscription plan. And then if you write to rajat@e-gmat.com, we can tell you how to go about doing that. Vijay says, should an answer choice is a clear marker of wrong answer? Is that so? No, that isn't so. Now, again, when you're doing GMAT verbal, it's a test of logic. Don't bring stats into it just because, I mean, yes, stats do work sometimes, but they don't always work. For example, a lot of people think must is always wrong, and I will show you at least 6 questions in which must is a part of correct answer. So, so don't go statistically. Now, the only time you'd go statistically is if you're running short of time and you don't have the time to read the question. But in normal course of things, do not go statistically. Is it possible to move to V25 and V45 in 20 days with dedicated study? Depends on what your starting score is, depend on what you have. So, I mean, we've had students who've done that. So here is an example of a guy who did do that. So, so yes, it is possible if you are, yeah, if you are at a V39 to move to V45 is possible, Kaveen, yes. Can you again buy just the test series on e-GMAT? Again, you don't just buy, we sell the entire package. Again, buy a monthly subscription if you just want to buy the test series or just the Scholarium as well as Sigma X. So Soumya, again, write to Rajat@e-GMAT and the nice thing the reason for that is, even when we sell the test series, unlike other prep companies, we support you, we support your doubts. And if you don't have the entire package, we'll ask you to refer to a certain concept file to explain this, and you won't be able to get to it if you just offer the test series. So it is for your benefit. Just go for the monthly option if you think that's all you need. But again, remember this, these are options which are there for people who know they just have to take the test in a month and they know they'll be done with it overall. Okay. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. It was wonderful to have you. Remember, we have the algebra webinar tomorrow. I want to let me just share uh, the registration links for those webinars. Do attend the algebra webinar tomorrow. If some of you were at Q46, Q45, this webinar will help push that score higher. Okay. And again, the GMAT strategy webinar next weekend. Also, if you've not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you can do that. Just search for e-GMAT. Okay, guys, with that, bye-bye and have a good day.